Hi, I'm Thelma Adams. I'm a novelist and film critic, and I reviewed my first professional movie at New York Film Festival, Film at Lincoln Center. It was in 1993, and the movie was Robert Altman's Shortcuts. Now we are going to go back to 1993 with Jono McLeod, who is the writer-director of My Old School, which is a documentary like you've never seen before. And one other thing about 1993 is that, Jono, you attended the school as well.
Yes, this movie kind of doubles as my high school reunion, basically, of getting all my classmates together and telling a story of something that happened in our high school class back then. In 1993, a new boy joined our high school class, our junior year class. And he came from Canada. He was a bit of a geek. He dressed up in a school uniform. He looked very different to us, talked differently to us, and it just didn't really fit in. But over the course of the next 2 years, basically, he sort of worked his way up the kind of social strata of high school life and ended up becoming one of the more popular kids around. And this film is the story of how that happened and why he was so successful at it.
And can you tell us what drew you to this? It's the first story that you've told?
Yeah, my first feature, all my work before has been television documentary or shorts. So I'd always known one of my producers, Olivia Lichtenstein, I've worked with quite a lot. And she'd always told me, Jono, that story that you always tell, your dinner party story about your high school classmate, that's your feature. That's what you should be making. So, when the time came that I kind of felt ready to do that, which was a long time ago, making this film for a while, off I went. And it was kind of a case of reconnecting with a lot of my high school classmates, not least Brandon, to try and tell this story and tell it within the parameters that I was kind of set. That was the big challenge.
Well, the interesting thing is those parameters. So Brandon Lee, not the Brandon Lee that we know. Brandon Lee, how did you reach out to him? Were you always somewhat in touch in the past?
No, he hadn't kept in touch with anyone bar one other of our classmates he'd kept in touch with. So no, I'd reached out to him. He's told his story a number of times over the years. Like back when everything happened, he did the kind of chat show circuit and went around and kind of told his story on camera. He's published a number of kind of accounts of his, story. He's spoken to newspapers and stuff. But over the years, I think he began to kind of distrust the media. And so the stipulation when I reached out to him and said that I was interested in telling the story on film, he said that he was willing to speak, but he would not appear on camera. He didn't want to be seen. So I knew that was a bit of a challenge if I wanted to make a feature film. Looking back, I really should have made a podcast. I don't know why that didn't occur to me. But
well, it was kind of pre-podcast, middle podcast.
Yeah, I suppose, things hadn't quite peaked by that point, kind of 5.5 years ago. But I was aware of a movie called The Arbor by Kyle Bernard that came out about 10 years ago, I think, or something. And it was a documentary which told the story of a famous British playwright, but through the medium, the people featured did not want to be seen on camera, didn't want to participate in that way. So it was lip synced by actors, the entire film, or chunks of it. And so I was aware of that technique. And I thought, wow, wouldn't that be interesting in a film about someone who's perhaps not so trustworthy or is not the most trustworthy narrator of their own story? And wouldn't that be interesting to use that technique? And then that kind of played into the fact that I was aware that back in the 1990s, there was supposed to be a movie made about this story of Brandon's story. And that was going to be directed by and star Alan Cumming. So knowing that, and kind of in that movie was about to happen and then it fell through and it was never made, and it kind of became known as one of Scotland's great unmade movies. Why did that never happen? And certainly us classmates, we were all wondering why this story had never been told. And so basically they putting this film together and getting Alan on board was pretty key to making that all happen. And knowing
how did you do that as a filmmaker who hadn't made a feature before? What was your hook? Just that he was already interested?
For Alan, I think it tickled him that this role that he was all set to play a quarter of a century ago had found its way back to him. I was looking for someone to portray the present day Brandon. So somebody who, not set in the 90s, but kind of now. And so for Alan, the fact that, this role had somehow found its way through the decades and landed back on his lap, I think that was appealing. And Alan loves a challenge. Anything. If you come to Alan, he's currently working on his first ever solo dance piece for the Edinburgh Festival. Never done a dance show before. He will do, if you come up with something unique, Alan will want to do that. So I think that was the hook, really. That's what got us there.
So how hard is it to do that lip syncing? Because he does come to embody Brandon Lee. You really believe it's him.
Yeah, it was such a surreal experience to be in the room with Alan when he was doing. It was like some kind of Olympic athlete, basically. It was a day and a half we spent filming it. It was super intense. I don't know how Clio had done it in the Arbor and everything, but I just came up with it's kind of like a reverse ADR. So for Alan, he was kind of used to it because it was the same thing as him having to go in and add his lines in to, badly recorded audio or whatever. But it was in reverse. So it was about him. Partly it was that, but it was also him trying to embody this person who he's never met, and try and figure out how to perform that but be constricted within the way this man talks. And it was really intense. It was just beat, 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 line, repeat, beat, 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 line, repeat. It was sending everybody crazy, but for me, it was just phenomenal to be in a room and see such an amazing actor as Alan do that. And and then be able to kind of stitch it all together. And there was definitely moments when it was kind of creepy, really, because it felt like Brandon was kind of coming alive. Perhaps not the Brandon that I was in a recording studio with, but certainly what I was looking for with Alan's kind of depiction was perhaps to create the person who Brandon Lee would have been if the Brandon Lee we knew had grown up.
So that's complicated. So he's like the person he would have been if he had actually gone to high school at 17 and become a doctor, or the person who went to high school later.
To put it bluntly, basically, if his disguise had remained, if the disguise
intact,
that Brandon created, the physical disguise had grown up, then that's what Alan is depicting in the film.
And you're saying that the subject withheld his face, you think, because he just did not want to be identified any longer, or he didn't want people to know him at the market, or what was the final?
It's a tricky one because people do know him at the market because he still lives in the same town where this all happened or very close by. So a lot of my classmates will still text round. We've got a group chat and they'll be like, I just saw Brandon in the supermarket. I was standing behind him in the queue. And he doesn't want to interact with anyone. So that's the weird thing. I certainly around town, everybody knows that's Brandon. That's the guy who did that thing. So if he wanted an anonymity in that sense, then he wouldn't still be living in that town. He told me that he had he didn't want to be seen because he had certain facial surgery that he either wanted to do or had been done in the past. And for whatever reason, that was his line in the sand. Right. He did not want people to see what he looks like now.
And on the flip side, as you talk about the people, your school chums that are still there, you get when you're interviewing them now, you get this real sense of collegiality among you all and how fun it is to be back, and how maybe in this relatively normal school, this very strange thing happened.
Yeah, I guess it was a normal school. It's that weird thing.
Relatively.
It was great. Reconnecting with my classmates was great. But it's certainly, especially making it now and making it in the last 5 years as well, it was a really different experience. It was a very different film making it now than if I'd made it 10 years ago. Because certainly my kind of lack of awareness of the racism and the kind of weird stuff that girls at the school were kind of, weird, like just inappropriate stuff happening and things that in 2022, we can look at very differently. So yeah, that was the strangest thing. But in terms of just a fun level, it was just, we knew we filmed all the interviews in an actual old school. We rebuilt pretty much exactly the classrooms that we were taught in. So just those moments of a lot of those people I hadn't seen properly for 25 years or whatever. So to not only reconnect with them, but reconnect with them in an old school. My favorite moment was when I was interviewing one of my classmates, Adnan, and we got towards the end of the interview, and one of the runners came up and said, "Oh, Jono, Adnan, Mr. Gunn, your physics teacher, is downstairs in the office. He wants to see you." So these two 40-something-year-old men were we were giggling down the corridor on our way to Mr. Gunn's office.
You really, I mean, in some sense, it reminds me then of the Apted movies, 7 Up. You see these people who are this age at this moment, but you can also see who they were in the past.
Yeah, and I think we were all kind of confronted with that to different levels. Certainly you find with, I guess it was kind of confronting. Watching the film is kind of confronting for some of the classmates, because they're suddenly learning about Stephen's story, for example, and about his experience of school. And we were either oblivious to that, or we were, perhaps some of them were involved in it. Perhaps I know I was probably certainly complicit by not speaking up for somebody who was experiencing that level of bullying. So that's been the kind of perhaps one of the trickiest parts for all the classmates. But aside from that, it's certainly been, it's been, for me personally, it's been a weird it's such a weird subject to make a film about someone who goes back in time, and in doing so, go back in time yourself to reconnect with your younger self. Because, a lot of people, the big question you're always asked about, Brandon, is, how did you not know? How did you not know the secret that this person had found their way into your school? Why was it not obvious that a 32-year-old man was in your class in high school?
Everybody will find out why when the movie comes out later this month on July 22nd. But for now, we can say he was 32, he was in high school.
Yes,
without giving away the
maybe
whole...
a slight spoiler for it. I don't know if I'll be great to get for that one. But yeah, basically, why were you not aware that there was this person with this huge secret in your class at school? And my answer to that is always that we all had our own secrets. My secret in high school was that I was a 16-year-old gay kid and was trying desperately not to let that secret be out. So I didn't have time to pay attention to anybody else's secrets.
That's a huge secret in Glasgow in '93.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was challenging, and it's been strange to kind of reconnect with everyone now and have this weird thing. I was very much, I was kind of in good stead to make this film, because I'm not from the town where the school is. Bearsden is the town. It's very much kind of a character in the film, really. A kind of posh suburb of Glasgow. I'm not from there. I was from the other end of the tracks, a little town nearby called Clydebank. And me and some of the other kids would be bussed into Bearsden every day. So, I didn't really have friends in Bearsden. I didn't really have a social life to speak of around that time with the other kids from school. So I very much felt like an outsider then, and felt like it when I was starting to make this film. So to reach out to everyone and kind of be able to connect with them now as an adult, obviously, when you're an adult, when you're grown up, now you know how to connect with people from school. Exactly. And that's kind of what this film is about as well, isn't it? Is of course we'd know. Now we're grown up how to do it, but back then you're totally clueless.
Right, exactly.
Hence the movie.
Exactly. I'm curious about the multiple storytelling techniques you use. You use Alan Cumming lip syncing, and then you have found footage. So I don't know what extent you have, what that was like, and then animation in a 1990s style. Do you want to talk about when you decided to kind of mix these things up and what inspired you?
Yeah, the weird thing is the very, very last piece of the puzzle was the animation, which sounds weird because you'd think that would be the first thing we'd have to set going. But I'd set off on this project thinking, oh great, I'm going to make a movie and we're going to shoot some period reconstruction. We're going to, and then someone explained the budget of that to me. And we were kind of barreling into trying to do a version of that. we tried certain techniques of kind of filming actors on green screen and rotoscoping over them. And then the pandemic happened. And it became clear just from trying to film some interviews of two people sitting together that was impossible. So how were we going to shoot a film within budget? And I was watching a TV show on Disney Plus called WandaVision, a Marvel show, where they every episode perfectly reconstructs a certain era of US TV sitcoms. And I suddenly realized, gosh, is there a way, because our film is set in two distinct periods, it's set in the 90s and earlier, is there a way we can do that, a simple way, an easy way in budget to do that? And so basically our animation team, a company called Wild Child, who are a Scottish animation team, they're based in Scotland. I reached out to them and we spoke about that, because I had this realization basically that, you know, Brandon walked into our classroom with this North American accent, curly hair, glasses, very monotone voice. And he was Daria. He was MTV's Daria, who was the kind of 1990s icon of high school animation, certainly. So how perfect to kind of pay tribute to her and to pay tribute to that era by kind of loosely connecting the two. Yeah.
And had you already had these parts scripted, and therefore they animated from what you'd already scripted?
Yeah, certainly. There was a storyboarded cut of the film that we had made. That was basically fully storyboarded and scripted. We probably made some changes kind of when the animation decisions came, but for the most part, you know, we were touting around a storyboarded cut of this film, and it wasn't until I unlocked the key to that animation idea that everything kind of just sort of fell into place and it kind of made sense. And
were there films that you used that inspired you? Obviously Daria and the animation and WandaVision, but were there films in the past that you referenced, or were you just really trying to bite off something different to suit your narrative?
I mean, I was aware, I was aware of other animated documentaries and and I would look at the budgets and go, you know, holy shit, that's not possible. So, you know, it's something like Waltz with Bashir, which is just so beautiful. And even obviously I wasn't aware of it, but, you know, suddenly Flea appeared at Sundance the year before we did. And, you know, and how it was so strange to see that here was an animated film made by a guy who went to high school with someone who didn't want to appear on camera. And so they had to find a way to tell that. So it was and although we're a bit more lightweight than Flea, which is a beautiful film. It was more, to be honest with the animation, it was more I wanted to hit a TV look. So with the Daria thing, that was definitely that for the 90s. And then when we dial back into the past, the reference points were like Scooby-Doo and, you know, kind of the Archies and stuff like that. That was my kind of the stuff I was throwing at the animators.
What was your training before this? I know you've done nonfiction before.
So basically my background is initially journalism. I studied broadcast journalism at university. Now the most awful bit about that was I started broadcast journalism college the week that the Brandon Lee story broke. So I was the idiot sat in journalism class, having not spotted this massive story that was all over the British press that week. It was pretty grim. So anyway, I got through that, and soon after that kind of became a reporter for Scottish TV News.
I just want you to pause 1 second and tell us, what did it feel like to discover that this person who was in your class was not a teenager, but in his 30s? What was that moment like for you when you were there? You were in broadcasting school, hitting your head.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I found out just the week before we kind of set off. So it was like my final days of being in Glasgow. Basically, I studied down in England, and it's such a classic thing of teenage life. Basically, that didn't really mean that much. I remember my friend Ross phoning me and saying, "Oh, you'll never guess what. Carol snogged that boy from down the park, and Alexis got really drunk." And also Brandon Lee's a 32-year-old man. And it was like, all right, okay.
It didn't really.
It wasn't. The shock was waking up one morning and breakfast TV news being on. and your school's on there, that's when you go, oh, that's bigger than I thought it was.
That's not just gossip. Yeah.
It was good gossip.
Big gossip. I think when you're watching it, there are scenes, there's footage. The annual play that year was South Pacific. And this is the interesting part in terms of when you talk about watching it in 2022 versus maybe a decade ago, is now you see Brandon Lee, he's the lead in South Pacific, and he's kissing the heroine. And the whole memory that she has of the event, and you realize that they're on stage at doing the big number in the middle of Glasgow is a guy who's completely age inappropriate for this.
Yeah, it was a really strange one. It certainly spoke to the creation of memory, and I guess the creation of the Brandon character, basically. I think what I came to realize was that my understanding of the whole Brandon Lee saga going into making this film was entirely informed by the fact that the only person who'd really been telling the story all these years was Brandon himself. So we'd all come to believe his version of events, because none of us had ever done this thing of getting together and collectively kind of poring over and saying, well, did you ever see that? And did you? And I remember him having a party and stuff. And all this kind of collating all that memory together had never kind of forensically happened, because I think when the story broke, the media interest was so intense that a lot of people just scattered and didn't want anything to do with all that. So it's taken kind of this amount of time, certainly for some of the teachers maybe, to find the humor in it and be able to sit down and speak to me about it. But yeah, certainly, that footage existing of the real Brandon performing in School Musical, we were always aware that footage existed, but I don't think anybody had ever, including the British press, I don't think anybody had ever bothered to watch the whole thing, possibly because it was so blooming awful. But nobody had got all the way through the video until we did, and we found a scene that didn't sit with everyone's memory.
No, and tell me also, so and who owned that video, or was it at the school, just in the drama department, or someone's parents had taken a picture?
Yeah, it was all the people who took part in the show had this video basically, but nobody had watched it for 25 years.
We have those in drawers for my children. I understand. And what tone? I mean, obviously, you could have gone a lot of ways with this. What tone? It's a very fun movie, and it has a lot of bounce to it, but it's a very odd story in the background. So, what was the tone? It's not an easy, simple way to. It's not a direct story.
Yeah, no. And what I didn't want to make a film where I tie everything up in a bow at the end and tell you what to think. The Brandon Lee story it's not black and white. There are real gray areas to it. I think some people think that I gave Brandon not too rough a ride in the film. Basically, I maybe let him off a bit easily. But I wasn't looking to make, I was super aware that, whenever we would pitch this movie to people, the first thing they would talk about would be the imposter. And they would talk about three identical strangers, these films that are amazing, but have a real darkness to them. And
definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want that. For me, the very idea that Brandon, the very idea that a stranger rocked up to our high school and things would never be the same again is the premise of every high school movie. It's the premise of Clueless, it's Mean Girls, it's all of those movies. So exactly. I wanted to make the high school movie that'd never been made. And so that's also why I put the little high school movie Easter eggs in there. Obviously Alan was always going to play this role and he had that connection to Romy and Michelle. But our other teachers, we've got Claire Grogan, who was Gregory's girl in kind of probably the greatest Scottish high school movie, plays one of our teachers. But best of all, to be able to get Lulu
amazing,
to play another of our teachers and sing the title song, the Steely Dan.
How did you do that? And people, I think, are aware that she sang "To Sir with Love."
Yeah, so back in the 60s, you know, starred opposite Sidney Poitier, sang To Start With Love, made it that massive hit in the States. And that is the difficult bit for Lulu is that I'm Scotland's biggest Lulu fan. So it was slightly, I think she got, I've probably got a restraining order to keep me away from her now. But the cutest thing for me was I live in East London, in the part of London where Lulu filmed To Start With Love back in the 60s. And we recorded the lines. You know, it was kind of, lockdown was kind of on and off, and it just made sense for Lulu to come to my place to record these lines. And there was this moment when she stepped out of the taxi onto the kind of cobbled streets of Wapping where she filmed To Start With Love, and it was 55 years later, and she was appearing in my high school movie. So it was really special.
That's kind of a mind bender.
Yeah. Well, and going back in time for her as well, you know, going back in time for everyone. Basically, anybody involved in this film has connected with an older version of themselves to do it.
Exactly. And since it played in Sundance and before it opens on July 22nd, what's happened with the movie? What's changed in your life? And are you going on to the next? What are you working on now?
Gosh, it's really hard I'm trying to work up a next movie, and it's just, I'm finding it really really challenging to balance that and, you know, getting this film out there and kind of devoting enough time to this. But yeah, no, I do have something that I'm working on. I think I feel a bit burned out in the world of documentary. It's been really intense. Making a documentary is intense anyway, but making one where you have to deal with your past is even more challenging. So I think I'd quite like to take a breather and investigate. I mean, certainly one of the more fun things I found about this film was making those flashback scenes and writing the kind of the animated scenes and stuff. So I would like to investigate whether I want to do that again, whether that be in a straight up narrative or in an animated film or something. So I guess everybody's probably waiting to see what this film does, and then
Right.
people just do what they want me for.
And is there another story? I mean, this is such a good, mind-blowing story that happens to have happened at your high school. Is there another story like that you could find and tell? Have you been
absolutely.
looking?
And that's the thing, is like, the Brandon story is only a story because we found it out. There are more Brandons out there, and we've all met them. Every one of us has encountered somebody who's straight up told us lies about their life. It happens all the time. And that's what I've come to realize. So yeah, there definitely is more stories to be told in my life, and it doesn't. Do I want to make another film that's connected to my life right now? Probably not, but maybe in the future.
Good. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Jono McLeod,
Thank you so much,
for coming and talking to us about this, you know, truth is stranger than fiction film that really is entertaining, enjoyable, and strange too. So thank you.
Thank you so much.